right. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Angie here again for another edition of Afternoon Science Live, whatever we're calling it. It's summer. So we are going to kind of continue on. We've been kind of thinking about discussing names of animals, so common names, scientific names, and sort of like confusion that can happen and things like that. And so specifically today, I wanted to talk about the differences between hawks, falcons, and eagles. And then just because I will use literally any excuse to get the birds out, I brought some birds that we have here. So hawks, eagles, and falcons are birds of prey, so they're all raptors. And raptors are grouped together based on physical characteristics, just on how they're looked. So now that we have gotten much more fancy technology, we can tell which animals are closely related but using genetics, like actual genes, being able to see, yep, this tree branched over here and this one is closely related. But before we had that sort of technology, scientists just kind of looked at stuff and went, they look very similar. They must be closely related. And so things like raptors and hawks, eagles, and falcons are kind of the same way. So very broadly in science, when we classify animals, we kind of have levels. So the top level is kingdom, right? So we have the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, so on, right? So we've got kingdom, that's the big broad one. And so right now we're in the animal kingdom. And then you go down kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, and then most of us, we're pretty familiar with genus and species, right? So in a scientific name, when you have two words, so really obvious one is, and I'm going to forget the one for humans, is Homo sapiens, right? Homo is the genus, sapiens is the species. Let's see, what is it? Gavia immer is the loon. Gava is the genus and immer is the species. And almost all animals sort of have that classification. So let's see, we go class, order, aves is all the birds. So all the birds is an order. And so we can split that order into smaller groups, smaller groups. And so we're gonna get way down, and I'm gonna make sure I say it right. We have, so once we get into our birds, we're at aves. Then we're gonna kind of split it, and there's many splits, but we're only worried about two splits. We've got your occipiters, and you've got your falcons, basically. So we're gonna start with the falcons, and I'm gonna bring out a falcon. She's very small, and she's very noisy. Perfect timing. So this is a merlin. This is a female merlin. We call her Spitfire. And merlins are a small member of the falcon group. So in general, you can think of falcons as long-winged, smaller bodied, kind of bullet-shaped hunters of the air. So raptors, all raptors are predators, and so they all kill, or they all at least eat other animals. So when we think about raptors, usually we think about big birds like eagles and hawks and things like that. All right, so this is one of our smaller falcons. And so falcons fly very quickly. They have long, skinny wings. And for the most part, when they're gonna kill prey, they're gonna kill their prey using their beak. Okay, so falcons usually have a little notch on their beak. And for the rest of the birds that we're going to talk about, so falcons, we're going to break them off right away because they split off. They are really not very closely related to other raptors at all. Because when scientists grouped birds together as raptors, they did it based on physical characteristics and hunting styles based on actual genetics. All right, so this is just one example of a falcon. And another very popular falcon is the peregrine falcon, which happens to be the fastest animal on the planet overall, right? The fastest land animal is a cheetah, but overall, the peregrine falcon is the fastest, all right? So this particular bird here, she was hit by a car, And you can see when she flaps that wing over there, she really can't lift it very high. It only comes up a little bit. So when she is flying, when merlins are flying, they need to be able to lift their wings pretty much straight up and straight back down, each flap. And merlins in particular, when they're hunting, they're very picky eaters. They really only want to hunt other birds. And so if you think about, if your prey can fly, you're going to have to be able to fly faster, harder, better, all that stuff. So a wing injury is particularly dangerous for a merlin. And so because she can't fly, that means she can't hunt, she can't eat. She also wouldn't be able to escape from any other potential predators. And so it is because she is unable to fly, unable to take care of herself, that she lives here at the Science Center. And so here we take care of her, we feed her, we keep her warm, and sort of in exchange, she helps us do educational outreach. Anybody have any questions about the Falcon before I put her back? All right, well, if you think of one, go ahead and ask, raise your hand. If you're on the internet, go ahead and type it in, and we'll do our best to find it. Okay, so we've got our hawks and eagles, and we've got our falcon. So our hawks and eagles you can think about as broad wings, and falcons you can think about as long, skinny wings. All right, so falcons, they're way off in their own branch, doing their own thing. Now we're going to come over here and we're going to talk about hawks and eagles. And they're much more closely related. They're still only grouped together based on like characteristics and things like that. So it's not like genetic, they're not like cousins or anything like that. So when it comes to hawks and eagles, there's a couple of things. All right, so when we take our hawks, we can split our hawks into two groups. We've got our buteos or bootios, depending on how you say it, and those are really stout, things like red tails. And then we've got our occipiter hawks, and those are a little bit more slender. Those are more similar maybe to a falcon, a little bit faster and things like that. Occipiters are also known as like your woodland hawks. And so it kind of stands to reason if you're slender, a little more acrobatic, you're able to fly in and around those trees a little bit better. Whereas the buteos, those are the big gliders. Those are the ones that want to be out in the open. So I will bring out a big glider.
Eagle.
Good guess. This is O'Reilly, and O'Reilly is a red-tailed hawk. And red-tailed hawks, they get their name from that beautiful, rusty, reddish-colored tail back there. And these guys are a really good example of those big, stout, buteo, big, broad, gliding hawks. They're one of the larger species. He's obviously missing a big part of one of his wings, but they have a much more stout, wide wing. And so where a falcon is built for speed, for chasing, for agility, these guys are built for like long distance, gliding, looking down at the ground, trying to find their prey. But if we think about his feet compared to that merlin's feet, these feet are much tougher, much more stout. So where a falcon is probably going to kill its prey with the beak, a hawk or an eagle or really almost any other kind of raptor is going to kill its prey with its claws. So this guy here, his injury is fairly obvious. You can see he's missing a pretty big portion of that wing over there. If you wanted to think about like a human skeleton in comparison to a bird skeleton, if the wings were like arms, O'Reilly is missing his wing right about where your wrist is. So he's missing the very tip of it. But that very tip of that wing is where some very important flight feathers grow out. So when he opens this one, you can see these long, those really long, almost finger-like projections coming off. So he's missing all of those on this wing over here, which makes it so he really cannot fly. He can glide just a little bit, but certainly not enough to hunt or to get away from prey. So what happened to him is O'Reilly was flying around. He ran into a power line and he electrocuted that wing. And on his way to the wildlife hospital, he actually used that big sharp beak to rip off what was left of that damaged wing. And so he's missing that. It'll never grow back. And so he can't fly, which again means he can't hunt. He can't get away from predators. And so he can't get away from anything. So he wouldn't survive. He would either starve or be eaten. Any hot questions? Don't be shy. You can ask.
How good is their eyesight?
Ooh, excellent question. Hawks, owls, merlins, all of those guys, raptors in general, have amazing eyesight. So humans, we're hunters, we're predators. You know, before we had grocery stores, if we wanted meat, we had to go out in the woods, find it, catch it, and kill it. And we're built like predators. We've got sharp, meat-chomping teeth. We've got really good eyesight. And for the size of our skulls, our eyes are pretty big. And if we look at these guys' eyes, their heads, their eyes are huge compared to the size of their skulls. For instance, in an owl's eyeball, or both of their eyes, account for about 10% of their body weight. So, like, for me, that would mean I have 20 pounds worth of eyeballs hanging out of my head, which is insane when you think about it. Like, if I plucked out both of them, they would maybe weigh 3 ounces. I don't know. So yeah, they have really great eyesight, which makes sense because A, you're a predator, so you gotta be able to find your prey. But as a bird, you're also probably gonna be either up in the sky or flying really fast after your prey. So you gotta have really good eyesight. Good question. Any other questions? Ooh, what do they eat? Wonderful question. So these guys are what we call a generalist, and that means they'll eat generally anything. But if you can think of like a small mammal or rodent that would be running around on the ground, a red-tailed hawk would probably love to eat it. So things like squirrels, gophers, voles, mice, rats, all that kind of stuff. But they are, when I say generalist, I mean they are really generalist. They will go after insects, reptiles, snakes. We've seen babies trying to chase down dragonflies and things like that. Probably the only thing a red-tailed hawk wouldn't try is something that lived in the water. They just don't really think about fishing. But otherwise, a red-tailed hawk would probably eat just about anything. This guy will eat just about anything. He's really not picky.
What is the average lifespan of a hawk?
Good question. So generally speaking, different species are going to have a different lifespan. And so usually the bigger the bird, the longer the life. Red tails are pretty big. They live pretty long. I think average in the wild is somewhere around 20, 25. Captivity life is super simple, super easy. It's always warm and you always literally have your food handed to you every day. I think the oldest red tail in captivity was like 40 or 44, somewhere in there. And this guy was born in 2003. That makes them 18, 19, 18, 19, 18. So yeah, so he's kind of a middle-aged hawk, kind of in the prime, I suppose you would speak. So assuming nothing goes wrong, we should have him here for a long time. The merlin, speaking of ages, smaller bird, so shorter lifespan. In the wild, most merlins, somewhere between 7, maybe 10. A 10-year-old wild merlin is a very, very successful, super lucky merlin. In captivity, life's a little easier, so closer to 10 years is good. Ours, she is almost 13. So we usually say like she's way past her expiration date. She is an elderly bird. But you know, still kicking, so we'll keep feeding her and doing all the stuff. All right, any other hawk? Do you have a question?
How do they have really good eyesight?
How do they have really good eyesight? Well, part of it is they just have such big eyes that they can fit more of, so there's special cells in the back of our eyes that help us like interpret and see light. So they've got a lot more. Their eyes are bigger, they're packed in, and they've actually got a little spot on the back there where they're like double packed, called the fovea. And so like all of those things sort of stacked together kind of help make them have really good eyesight. Also, their brains aren't very complicated like ours are, and so their brains spend a lot more time and energy thinking about their eyes, or their brain power is used for vision, where like our brain power is used a little bit for vision, a little bit for daydreaming, a little bit for technology and eating, and you know what I mean? Like they're just a little bit more specialized. It's a really good question. Any other questions? All questions are good questions, by the
What's
way.
the average wingspan?
Average wingspan, excellent question. Off the top of my head, what is it? I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. I actually have little cutouts, but they're not here. So this is actually a pretty small red tail. Raptors are, their size is dependent very much on sex. So female raptors are very large in comparison to the males. And their size is also dependent on the climate where they're born. So a cold weather bird is going to be bigger than a warm weather bird. And so that is a male who was born in Arizona. So he's small because he's a male, and he's small because from where it's warm. So if he were near or compared to a female, especially a female from Minnesota, he would be like just tiny in comparison. All right, so we've got our falcons. We split them off right away because they're way different. So now we're talking about hawks and eagles, and we've got two different kinds of hawks. We've got our like gliding open air hawks, and we've got our forest hawks. Now we can talk about eagles. And eagles, so falcons you can think of as long wings. Hawks are broad wings. Eagles are just big giant birds that eat big giant prey. Like that is literally the most concise definition I could find. An animal or a bird that hunts during the day and can tackle prey that is more than like 15 centimeters, sorry. So relatively large prey, and that's about it. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any eagles here. They're really big birds, and so they require much larger enclosures, and we just don't have the space for them right now. Specifically bald eagles, because they're our national symbol, have, on top of all of the other federal type stuff, they have extra, and they're really big. They eat a lot, they poop a lot. A bald eagle is just more work than the Science Center really is able to put forth at this point. Now, if any of you turn into, wealthy engineers or the next Steve Irwin or whatever, please remember us and build us a fancy aviary, right? All right, and so finally, I'll bring out our last raptor, and this guy really... Now you might notice while he's flapping, it's very quiet. Owls are very silent when they fly. So if we said the falcons were off over here, kind of in their own separate branch, owls are equally as far out. These guys are much more closely related to things like nightjars and... So, owls are raptors. One other way a lot of people will break them up is falcons, hawks, and eagles tend to hunt during the day, and owls tend to hunt at night. Now, there are many species of owls that do hunt during the day, but very few. A lot of owls hunt right before the sun comes up and right after the sun goes down. And those animals that hunt at those times, and this is one of my most favorite treasured weird long science words, crepuscular. It sounds like a growth or something coming out of your skin, but it just means right before the sun comes up and right before the sun goes down. All right. So you might be looking at Oswald and you go, well, he's got both of his wings, he looks pretty healthy, what's up with him? He's a little different than the first two birds. The first two birds have physical injuries that make it so they can't fly. Oswald is actually an imprint, so he imprinted on humans. He was found on the ground and he was brought home by some people who probably didn't mean any harm, but they certainly didn't know what they were doing. And so they just brought this owl home, and eventually a rehabber found out, and he went, "Hey guys, really unhealthy for the bird, and this is potentially how much trouble you're going to get into if anybody ever finds out." So they gave Oswald to the rehabilitation center. They worked really hard to get him strong and healthy and ready to be released. But by the time Oswald was strong and ready, he had spent so much of his young baby life surrounded by owls, he never learned how to act like an owl. So he can see, he can fly, he can hear, he can do all that stuff, but he doesn't understand how to hunt or how to find a nest or a mate or any of those sorts of things. So even though he's physically healthy, he still wouldn't be able to survive in the wild. It's because he doesn't know how. I always kind of explain it like, if we spend our whole life in the United States speaking English, and then the day you graduate from high school, I drop you off in the middle of Germany, and well, Germany's not a good example because they speak English. I'm trying to think of a country where they don't speak English, right? I drop you off somewhere where English is not the language, and just go get a job and make your life. You're gonna go, I don't know how to do that, right? It's similar, sort of. So yeah, are there any Oswald or owl questions?
What makes the sea so good?
They have, so their eyes, first, so humans, we have nice round eyeballs, right? And owls' eyes are actually sort of bulbous. They're kind of shaped like a light bulb with an old style light bulb with like the bulb part in the back. And then in that back where there's all that extra space, I can't remember if it's twice or 3 times, but they just have tons more of those rods and cones. Let's see, cones see color. So they have more rods, the light and dark. They also have that fovea, which is one little spot where it's just extra sensitive. And then just the fact that those eyes are so huge, they're able to take in much more light, even in those very low light conditions. And so they do have really good vision, but they don't have good vision up close. Like everything is really blurry. Like you probably can't tell the difference between me and any other person this close. Like maybe he would be able to see a beard or something, but yeah, they're farsighted. Is that when you can like see far away but not up front? Yeah. So he would need reading glasses, but he would be able to drive without glasses. I think that's how that works.
So at the size of his eyes, can he technically see farther than a hawk?
That's a good question. So then we have to decide. So now we're going to set up an experiment. Who can see further, a hawk or an owl? We have to decide what is the lighting, because if it's darker or dim, the hawk is going to lose no matter what distance, because this guy's got better low level. And if it's too close, he's not going to be able to see anything. So it's kind of dependent upon our definition of seeing better, and then what we're looking at. Are we looking at dark? Are we looking at distance? Are we looking at the ability to see fine detail? You know, like the difference between being able to see the individual letters on a newspaper versus being able to tell how many newspapers there are, kind of a thing. So yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but what does he do? Is he just
Excellent question. Yep. So he's basically panting, just like a dog would. It has, of course, it has a fancy science name called gular fluttering. And yep, he's just warm, like it's fairly warm up here. As I said a couple times, like humans were predators. And so right now, like he's just being stared at by predators. And usually if a predator is staring at you, it's deciding, all right, can I fit my mouth around that? How much of a fight is it gonna put up? So his tiny little bird brain is going like, all right, am I on the menu? Are they gonna take my territory? So he's just a little bit nervous. And you know, if you've ever been nervous, you know, like your body temperature starts to go up and stuff like that. So he's just a little warm. And yeah, if you notice his pupils getting bigger and smaller, probably what he's doing is changing his depth of field. So he's trying to look close and look far and come back. For whatever reason, these guys don't enjoy this corner too much. I don't know if it's because the ceilings are really low or what, but. Any other questions?
What breed is it?
How far can he turn his head? So let's just do it. We'll do people, all right? So if we start on our left shoulder and we turn, then we stop. Usually that's about 180 degrees. The older I get, the slower, the less that range gets. The farthest anyone has measured an owl is 270 degrees. So if we do the same thing we did before, we're gonna start at our left. And we're gonna turn. We stop at about 180. If we go 100 more degrees, we'll be staring at our shoulder, the back of our shoulder blade. And the reason that owls are able to do that is because their neck bones, their vertebrae, are shaped very, very differently than ours. And they've also got about twice as many. So humans have 7, most owls have about 14. And they've also got special blood vessels. So if we turned our head as far as an owl, eventually the stuff would get in the way in our very important veins and vessels right there would get pinched off. And there would be no blood flow to the brain and we would pass out. Owls have, I don't know the exact mechanism, but they have special veins so that doesn't happen to them. Yeah, their whole bodies are built differently just so their heads can swing. And the reasons their heads have to be able to swing like that is because their eyes are shaped differently. So we have nice round eyeballs, so we don't have to move our head, and I can look up, I can look down, I can look to the side, I can look to the side, right? If an owl wants to do that, he's got to turn his whole face because those eyeballs don't really move around in there. And it's different for different species. So like the owl, you'll notice his eyes really don't move at all. The hawk, he can move his eyes a little bit, but certainly not as much as we can. Good question.
What kind of an owl did you say that was?
This is a great horned owl. They get their name from those little feathers up there. And then kind of control those. So we can make them stick straight up. He can lay them flat back, depending on his mood. If he gets really scared, he'll kind of lay them really far down to make himself look smaller. If he feels threatened and he wants to like, don't mess with me, he'll puff everything up to make himself look a little bigger.
Are those his ears?
Those are not his ears. That looks like, you know, we think like, oh, it looks like a cat, so that's where his ears are. If you look at his face, by his eyes, you'll see there's those little black stripes. So if you kind of follow that back stripe until you get to like right under his eyes, owl's ears are sort of like where we might think of our cheeks to be. And so they're right here, the side of his head. Most owls' ears are offset just a little bit. Some are crooked this way, so there also can be crooked front to back. And what that does is it helps to determine where a sound is coming from. And we're pretty good at this too with humans. Like if you close your eyes and start snapping your fingers, you can tell where that snap is without being able to see it. And when an owl's ears are offset like that, it just makes it easier to tell where something's coming from. He's bragging. He's like, that's right. Are there any other? Yeah. Ooh, can you touch his feathers? There are some feathers that are no longer attached to the owl that you can touch to see what he feels like, but he will bite. So these are wild animals. Most of the animals that we have at the Science Center are what we call domesticated. So that means they've been living with or around humans for many, many, many generations. You know, things like cows or bees or dogs, things like that. These guys are wild. And wild animals in general are pretty scared of humans. Because if you really think about it, humans are the most destructive, one of the most dangerous creatures on this entire planet. And most wild animals, on some level, understand that. And you know, if you think about every time you try to, you know, touch a robin outside, right? They fly away. Or a snake will try to run away. So most wild animals want to be as far away from humans as possible. The only reason these guys tolerate me is because I feed them. If I stop feeding them, they will stop behaving like this. And even though I feed him, if I try to touch him, if I tried to pet him right now, he would bite me. Like, I've got a pretty big glove, and that's what protects me. But he would bite. It's really cool. Any other questions? No? Great question. So some birds can smell, some birds cannot. Great horned owls, Zero sense of smell at all whatsoever. And it's kind of interesting because a great horned owl's most favorite snack is a skunk. And if you think about a skunk, they have those, it's black with big, bright, bold white stripes. And that coloration tells most predators, hey, don't come near me. I am going to make you regret it if you do, right? Well, if your defense is stinky, if I can't smell, your defense isn't going to do anything. So for an owl, a skunk's stripes really doesn't say, watch out. It says, here I am, come and get it. So I've been told that by a few, like in outreaches, by a few like longtime residents of the area that you can find a great horned owl's nest just by like walking through the woods and smelling, because they usually stink like skunks. Owls cannot smell. Good question. Some birds smell very well, like a vulture, for instance. They can smell one particle of carrion for miles and miles and miles away. You'll be able to find it. Any other questions? All right then. I'm gonna put them away and well, as always, thank you all in the audience so much for taking the time off of the super fun exhibit floor to sit here and just listen to me yammer on. Thank you so much for the internet people for tuning in, whether you're tuning in live or watching us later. I've got word that we are one person away from 50 subscribers on Twitch. So on the internet, go sign up on Twitch. Youngins out in the audience, you guys probably know a lot more about Twitch than I do, so please follow us. We're just Headwaters Science Center at Twitch. Please follow us. And you can ask us questions, you can be silly, whatever, it'll be fun. Yep, so follow us on all the media. Come visit us. We are open 7 days a week from 9:30 to 5.